interested in discourses, and it's particularly nice to do that in Berlin, because also there are some lovely friends who made their way out here. Some didn't make it. Some friends came to St. Louis, but they weren't able to come to Pankow. They thought it was too far. And so that's that about Berlin's different discourses in urban space and public structure. Well, yeah, Frieda and I have been working continuously on topics of memory and topics of immigration, the transatlantic discourses between Germany and America, and so our latest show also deals with it. But this is not what we are going to start with, of course. You have to wait till the end. That's how you do it, to make people sit down and stay, I guess. So we thought we'd start with some interactive things in public space. And the first project I wanted to introduce to you is called Einladung, Invitation. And it happened in 1998 on one of the most frequented subway stops in Berlin, on Alexanderplatz, and it's the subway stop of the line number 2. And
sorry,
in the back.
It's better if you turn the lights on.
Just in the back, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh,
Let's
really?
draw the curtains and let in some natural
no,
light.
it's fine.
Is it good? Can you see it?
Yes. Can you see the text?
I don't need to see the text. I am a professional, so I know what I'm going to say. If I would have to read it, I wouldn't be a professional. So the thing is that we like to do things that are not expected in a place where it is, to make people take in another way. And so when we were asked to come up with a solution for the subway stop on Alexanderplatz, which you see in the former picture, it's the square where Peter Gerens built these 2 famous buildings that structured this whole square. And then you see the life underneath. I mean, now it's gone through a huge construction series and has been also transformed, not in the best way, I have to say, architecturally, but the underground is so important here. So the line number 2 has always been used for exhibitions, even during DDR time. So the Neue Gesellschaft für Bildende Kunst, New Society for the Arts, took over this whole concept, and they invited us to be the first ones to create exhibitions and to create something in exhibition or come up with a concept for the structure underneath. It's so interesting that Daniela Kamani is here today, the artist who has done the last of this series of interactions at Alexanderplatz. So I find that really marvelous and telling, and maybe yeah, she wants to say something about it.
Before '89, that site was used by the East German government for peace and friendship and whatever. So, but after '89, it became an art place.
And so what we did was we watched people, what they do there. And the subway comes and goes and people stand around, and we thought they have some time to think about certain problems maybe. So we approached the Selfhelp group organization of Berlin, Sekis, and we worked out, we had 32 billboards, and we worked out 32 so-called problems, things you basically don't talk about in public. And there is one heart if you have heart problems. So what we did was we announced certain issues like müssen, we headlined it, and underneath we put the address of the Selfhelp group, which is for the incontinent people, vergessen, forgetting, which is for dementia. And so actually Sekis got 1/3 more calls from people all over, because people arrived, looked at it, thought, wow, that's an information kind of thing, and wrote the numbers down and started calling. And so handicapped, for people who are handicapped who may get some help, and people who are absolutely anxious and who can't face being in public and stuff like that. Our main 2 panels were installed on in the middle of the platform, and so we listed all the self-help groups existing in Berlin and many more, which we invented. Actually, Frida found out that basically women do self-help groups only, like social topics are a female thing, which is already a gender discourse. And so he invented the
Anonymous machos.
the anonymous machos. He was wondering who's gonna call them and, you know, do that. I think there are many more than they would admit, but you never know. So you see here this, the one must incontinence. We always used a color. Each color is different. And as I said, this headline, and what you see here is some graffiti. Of course, it's public space, despite the fact that it's a closed environment. Some people came, opened this little window of the subway and sprayed things outside. So first, we thought it's not such a good idea, but actually later we figured it's much more interesting if there are some patterns on it. And blühende Felder is of course a quotation of blühende Landschaften, Chancellor Kohl's, you know, when he speaks about the great future in East Germany and so on. And what we did here, we connected the East and West German organizations for unemployment groups. This was a time when Berlin had like 30% unemployment.
A little bit less.
Or a little bit less, but in some areas really a lot. And so it was a huge issue. And so Kotzen, which means vomit, people were objecting to that. The television came and did interviews with passengers. And a lady said, "This is upsetting to find such words in public space." She said to the Abendschau, which I thought is quite incredible. And yeah, Kotzen vomit, so we used a yellow color for that. Okay, so this is like one of the things. It was up for half a year, and it was really kind of interactive because it engaged people in some way. But on the other hand, technically, it was simply a painting. It was letters attached onto the canvas and different colors, and we had assistants who had to paint all those 32 billboards. In a year we wouldn't have been able to do it. So something really that hits like the sweet best is our project for the Nelson Mandela School in Berlin-Wilmersdorf. And what we did was, well, they wanted to include the old facade of the school and then somehow connect it to the new part of the school. It's like one of our smaller projects, but it's
Very little money.
But it's very dear to us, and we use it like the entrance into a movie theater. So we kind of advertise Nelson Mandela's face on the facade, and we also attach these letters underneath, and as you can see, it's a bilingual school, so we use a bilingual issue for the idea of the school. And we also painted the inside and made the concept for the colors. And what we did inside was to make all the kids who are coming from 16 nations to feel them more comfortable. We use all 24 time ranges and connect them with famous islands. So the project is actually called Time Island. And this is, the clock is working, so they, I mean, if they care for them, I don't know what's happening now, but actually every clock is running its own time and everything, like our time.
Our time zone is Peacock Island.
Is Peacock Island in Berlin, and so that's why we couldn't take the island where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned, Robben Island, but we thought Peacock Island is somehow more interesting and for Berliners, and also we don't want to, you know, kind of justify a prison or something. And you see the inside, how it was hung and installed inside this old structure, so we worked very nicely with the architect and put some colors up and so on. And outside, we installed these two benches, and one is called Utopia, and the other one Kitera. So it's about dreamland and where you go from to another island, the ideal island.
Take your time and go.
Yeah. And this is now a total switch and brings us more back to our memory projects, which is, and it's already the link between the outside and the inside, public space and museum as let's say a container of memory and what function a museum has in society. And this was our action for the liberty of Berlin's museums and against Friedrich Christian Flick, who was or is a Nazi heir. He inherited money from his grandfather. He ran away with that money to Switzerland. He never paid any taxes here. And then he offered his collection to the Hamburger Bahnhof after he had been denied, even in Zurich, I should say, in Zurich, and even there, right? So not even people there wanted it. I don't know if it's still the case now.
No, they said we want it if you pay in the slave worker fund, but then he ran away.
And to make a long, very long and complicated story short is that his grandfather was a huge supporter of the SS and of the whole Nazi structure, and so he also made a lot of money during Nazi time.
Renata, the grandfather bribed all the politicians, and that's called Pflege der politischen Landschaft, taking care of the political landscape. If you give to all the parties, you are in the best position.
Which they did afterwards as well in West Germany, but that's another story. But however, the question was that they made a lot of people work in their factories, slave labor, and they never refunded them. So the companies of Flick, and of course Flick excused himself by saying we sold the companies and now other people are responsible for that. So there were two kinds of ways to see it in public, and that was a huge discussion all over the media. The one side, people said, well, leave him alone, he didn't kill anyone or didn't do anything.
But he invited us for an activity because he displayed one of his works, the Bruce Nauman work, Poke in the Eye. And we said, okay, we can do that too.
Right. And so he's a collector of Bruce Nauman's work, we knew that, and so we started installing posters some weeks before the whole action and before the inauguration and the opening of the first installation at Hamburger Bahnhof Museum of Contemporary Art, and showed what actually he does.
Flick in Berlin.
Yeah, Flick in Berlin, so it means it's an art of collecting in some way, and what he does to Berlin. You have to know that the city of Berlin, or the Berlin Cultural Senate, pays for the upkeeping of the collection. So it's like, first of all, we increase the value of the collection, and second, we also pay for it, which was so much money that it takes the budget away from other collections and institutions. So there was this huge debate going on. Inside the institution of the SMPK, curators were not allowed to discuss it in public. So
and
that
it was a 7-year loan only, no gift.
At the beginning. And then of course the uproar came in the press. What we did basically was to come up with a public action, 2 posters, and one poster said, we demand. I have to say we did it together as an art project with the New Society for the Arts, again, Neue Gesellschaft für Bildende Kunst. So one poster said we demand free admission for former slave workers, and we used the image of Hamburger Bahnhof, and actually they had planned to put up 2 flags with his name. And we knew that. We analyzed it. We asked a lot of people who know him. We asked other collectors. We did our research, and this is the investigative part we do before we start any project.
We didn't go far thinking about his first names, because his first name is Friedrich Christian. And so we said, okay, F.C. But an American audience for sure reads it in a different way.
So our American intern said, oh great, fuck Flick. So they thought this was just crazy. Hi Wolfgang, nice that you found it.
Difficult. So the second poster is Tax Cheaters Show Your Treasures.
Yeah, and Tax Cheaters Show Your Treasure refers to his, his first address is in Zug am Zuger See, which means that he doesn't even pay taxes in Zurich, where he frequently stays, where people see him all the time, having dinner, meeting
But
people.
the lender of the collection is the company that has its seat on the island of Jersey or Guernsey.
Guernsey.
So it's a channel island.
It's not only a
Tax
channel
haven.
island, it's a tax haven. And actually the European Union, countries of the European Union are not allowed to make contracts with any companies that are based in a tax haven. However, this is a long story again, as you see, so it involves a lot of research. What was really interesting was how to realize the project, and as usual we involve our students. And, they participate in our projects, which means when we have a budget, we can include them. And it caused this uproar with the press. The reason for it was that the Spiegel magazine announced our activity like 3 days in advance. And they said to us, if we do it first, you'll get all the other press. And it was true. We were on CNN and BBC World Service, and friends of my parents saw me speak in Australia and all that. So this is nowadays global world in the arts where you do things. And it was very interesting, and it really made people think about the whole, like the whole happening. Because I don't know how many thousands of people they invited to the opening, but everybody was willing to go, and it was a huge party. The way how we found out when he would do it was Frieder, when the opening would be in the inauguration, because we had to book the panels a year, the billboards, yeah, a year in advance. That's what you have to do with advertisement. And so Frieder went to the library and checked out his doctoral thesis. And then he realized when the guy was born. And then he saw that it was in September. And then he knew he is so, the vanity, he's just so full of himself, that Mr.
In
Flick...
2004, he turned 30. 60, sorry.
60. And so he would celebrate his 60th birthday inside the collection. This was true. But we were just guessing. So that's like part of our psychological thing when we sit at home with friends and drink and eat. We just think, what might be, when and how, and who has the knowledge, and then we call and send emails out and say, do you know, and so on. And yes, then we found out it was all true. And so people had to go in and look at those advertisements that were exactly, the billboards were exactly across from the museum. And then to make it better, we got a call from a lawyer of victims of the Flick companies, and they said, we would like to support your activity. Could you think about extending it? You can get any money you want. That was really great. So we said, okay, can you rent more billboards? We want the whole city to be covered. We said, much better, we will rent a truck and we will put the billboards on the truck. And those trucks ran for 2 weeks all around the city. And people were like going up with thumbs up, onto the Linden, and in front of you'll see the Chancellery. And you have to know that Chancellor Schroeder is a personal friend of Mr. Flick, and he gave the inaugurational speech that night. And he really approached us, so we thought, this is fabulous. If you can cause so much trouble somehow that you stir up dust that the Chancellor approaches you. Because Schroeder said, oh, and those people go against it. We were not the only ones. Not that we're these heroes, but we kind of helped a lot to increase, the discourse in public and the media.
And half a year later, he paid 6 million euro in the slave worker.
He did, and I think we helped a little bit. We were just in Zurich where the Hochschule der Künste had invited us to give a talk about Flick. And I thought, oh God, the poor guy, because they printed huge invitations and they were laid out all over the cafes, restaurants, supermarkets, wherever you came, there was this blue invitation, Flick, in Berlin. And I went like this and I thought, oh God, I felt some pity for him. And I have to admit. And so a day later, it was in the Neue Zürcher Zeitung that he had paid into the slave labor fund. Actually, had made a separate, like a foundational construction so he could add the money to it. And so you see this, they even ran in front of the parliament. And we were nobody paid attention. I mean, that's how close you can get with funny posters to the parliament.
Now it's different.
Now it's different, I think, yeah. Now it's a little bit different, yeah. But it was quite an experience. And then there was the Berlin Art Fair. It still existed. So we asked our friend Safri Cohn, who is used to these kind of things coming from Israel and so on, if he could do like an action in front of the exhibition halls.
And other students
were there. And so we bought them Gretchen wigs, you know, these kind of nice blonde wigs. And we created these little sculptures they were
I'm not
holding.
asking about religion, but about money.
But about money, and they had all this German, Deutschland T-shirts, and then they were saying to the visitors, "Oh, would you please also donate for the collection because they have no money and they are, you know, so poor, and the man is so poor." And people were completely baffled, said, "Oh, we should actually," but they couldn't, you know, they couldn't put money in there because this was all made of paper. It was absolutely artificial, so it was also a little bit. And then we printed a catalog which you can download online. It's basically about collectors and what makes a person being a private collector. And this is a story, a true story of Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck. You know, and Donald Duck instructs, all true, and Donald instructs his uncle how to make it into society. It's not all about being just rich. You have to make it through the arts and culture. And so Donald tells him, you know, that he should start collecting and so on. And then Uncle Scrooge, who is totally cheap, he thinks that it's much better to paint your own kind of quilt-like paintings, like minimal or abstract, and then make it to documenta. Of course, we made that up, but this was just a lovely story. So if you go on our website, you can absolutely download this catalog. The reason for that is that the Neue Gesellschaft für Bildende Kunst were threatened they wouldn't get any money from the Senate anymore if they would continue supporting and spreading out the catalog. So they took the catalog back and stored it for 3 years. And so we bought parts of it and sent it all over the States to every library, basically. You know, that's just easy. You can spread it out. And then we put it online on our website, which is, of course, our home. And that's the way you can do it. There are a bunch of other catalogs which you are absolutely free to download. And one of the principles here to kind of take it away from this kind of sensationalist doing is we were invited to provide an artwork for the Walter Benjamin show, Walter Benjamin in the Arts, in 2004. And it took us 2 years, I think, to come up with an idea that was as simple as possible. We went to Magdeburger Platz and we photographed the doorbells at the house now. The house where Benjamin was born was bombed, and there is a new building. And so we simply enlarged it and added some names of scholars on that billboard, and we created a light box and installed it inside a, you know, inside a niche or something outside the building. So actually we connected Magdeburger Platz and Haus am Waldsee, which is quite far away, and we also provided a map, which I'm not going to talk about now, but this is basically what we like to do. Whenever we have to be in a place, we try to spread things out in some way or another, and that's what we call a social sculpture. So another project that has the same, uses the same method is Die Stadt als Text, the city as text for the Jewish Museum in Munich. And when the museum opened, we were asked to come up with a project, and we did. We created a carpet, and which looks exactly like the map and is installed in the floor. And we took out all names and created a figure ground map. A map that has no identity anymore, but the new identity was created by adding it and connecting it to 99 figures and stories in the city. And so in the museum you can take these, you didn't bring any, right? I think you have them in your library, probably. We gave you some.
We could have brought.
And so we, you can take one of these maps and go out into the city and follow up all these stories in a way that normally you wouldn't think about the city, or you wouldn't think about the culture, because Munich is utterly Catholic, as you might know, and Jewish history in Munich is like a contradiction in itself, but actually there is more than one would think, right? And so this is something like Bayern, yeah, right, Bayern. The whole, so here you see the carpet, which is like an interactive.
Oh, Landauer is in it here too.
Yes.
Yeah, which is a rather.
People don't know that.
is an interactive
tell the story.
structure. And as a follow-up, the city of Munich approached us and said, could you do something, we have money left, only in Bavaria, you know, they have money and they don't know what to do with it at the end of the year, and they said, could you do something that would bring out like Jewish structures and Jewish culture in the city? And we said, oh yeah, of course. And we went to museums, we picked 16 museums, federal museums, museums of the city of Munich, and a private museum. And we called it Show Your Collection, and we interviewed curators, museum directors, and similar people who are involved with museums, and asked them, what is Jewish in your museum? Some museums we had absolutely, really did not, we knew what we wanted. So you see here the layout of the inner structure of the city, the medieval structure. And you have in the middle the Stadtmuseum with the photography museum, film, and the Jewish museum now. And then all kind of other places, Bayerische Staatsbibliothek with one of the most marvelous archives in Germany. Haus der Kunst, of course, a very weird building with a huge history, right? So somehow it seems that we can do it without, but it's hard in Germany to leave the German past out, put it in brackets. And the Alpine Museum is the only private museum which we use, but that's a very interesting topic. And so we invited a group, or we worked together with a group called the Falcons. It's from the Social Democrats, a young group founded in 1906 or something, and they're still active. And we used megaphones, and we would go around the city and read in front of museums what the object is about that is inside the museum. So we made people like go in, and this was on the day of open museums, Lange Nacht der Museen. And we got a huge crowd following up, so as we started walking, there were kind of people processions, you know. That is actually the culture of Munich. And yeah, and then we published also a catalog, and you see Orson Welles, and you would wonder, what is this about Orson Welles? Actually, the archive of Orson Welles' work is in Munich at the Film Museum, which is one of the most marvelous things, because in the 80s, nobody was interested in his work in the US, nobody was interested in his work. And so his partner sold it to the Munich Film Museum, and they really take great care of it. The film we were interested in was The Merchant of Venice, and his great role as Shylock. And this is about, you know, the famous words, don't I have eyes, don't I have nose, I'm not a human being like any other.
You have to go
So
on YouTube and see that small clip. It's breathtaking.
It's breathtaking, they have it, but the rest of this sequence is lost. And when we spoke to the director about it, he said, we think it's in these 2 rows, but we are not sure about. And the reason why, and they are sealed, and why they can't open it is they are afraid that the whole thing might fade or rot, because it's an early material. It's like a material from the 50s, and so they don't really know what to do with it. So they are still discovering it. So it's this mystic and secret about this topic. So somehow it worked very well together. And the other thing that starts to explain a little bit our show in St. Louis is the Lehmbach House. The Lehmbach House, as you may know, is named after the painter Lehmbach. It was his villa. He donated it to the city of Munich. It's now the Museum of the City of Munich, and has a wonderful collection of late 19th century and marvelous 20th century and 21st century art. And
Blue Rider Group, for example.
And Blue Rider and so on, yes. And Murnau is also connected to them. And one of the most spectacular pieces there is the Joseph Beuys piece, Show Your Wound. And I remember I was rather young when this whole scandal appeared in the news that Mr. Engelhorn, who was actually also he funded some of our projects in Munich, and that he had bought it for the Lehmbach House because they wanted to acquire it. They have quite an archive of Joseph Beuys' work. And this is about German past. How can Germany live with the wounds? How can this country actually ever get away with it? How can people face it? Which object would identify with it, and so on. So this is one of the most impressive installations in the museum, and this is where we took the title from. Show your collection, show your wound. So there is this parallel, and then we asked the director, Helmut Friedl, who actually did my first solo show in the 80s. I said, Helmut, is there something, a Jewish story involved with the museum? And then he
showed the painting of Lois Corinth, and the painting depicts a very close friend of Corinth, the painter. It's Maccabeus Struck, very well known for being a famous etcher. He even showed in New York. And here he is depicted in the First World War with the uniform of a lieutenant, because he served in the German army in the Eastern Front and took care of Jews in this region, that they get money and don't turn into victims during that war. So that's the picture, and for sure, because of the title, show your collection, we always have the finger in the picture, in the image, because then we don't have to ask the museum for the copyright.
Well, it's not the
because
only
it's
reason.
installation.
That's one of the reasons. The other reason is, of course, you read with a finger in your hand, right? So when you read the Kabbalah, you don't read directly with your hands. You use a finger and you go over the pages. And so this is like the translation from the outer world to the inner world. And that's the same thing we use. This is like a time connection, which we also love to do, for example, in the Bavarian Quarter, where we connect two times together, the 30s and 40s, and then today, and or the year of the inauguration. So that's the thing. Interestingly enough, you would never think that it could be a Jewish topic, the Alpine Museum. I'm a huge hiker, I should tell you. I love the Alps. So we went there and we looked at it. And this was a man who was one of the first, or actually the first, who climbed up the Wilder Kaiser. That's a chain of mountains in the Austrian Alps. Fritz Pflaum is that. And that is the Fritz Pflaum hut, which of course the Nazis renamed, and then after the war it was named back. So that's how famous he was, and that's where the hut is, in the Wilder Kaiser area. And when, you may know that Joseph Beuys had one of his last exhibitions in New York at the Guggenheim Museum. It was like 2 years before he passed away. And his gallerist, Mr. Bloch, Dahlem, oh, he was Franz Dahlem, he asked him, aren't you disturbed with this ramp that goes up and nothing is evened out and so on? He said, no, not at all. Actually, I would love to show my work somewhere in the mountains. And he said, where would you like to show it? And he said, where the Wilder Kaiser is. So that was another unexpected research we did, or finding we made during our research, and we thought this is just a fantastic coming together on this project. Well, now, one of the most, I would say, pregnant museum works here is called Who Needs Art? We Need Potatoes. It's a proverb in Swabia, in Stuttgart, and the story goes that Wilhelm, King of Württemberg, Wilhelm I, King of Württemberg, wanted to acquire a private collection of the brothers Boisseret. The brothers Boisseret were two smarties, like bankers are always, and smarties. And some are smart, and they were really smart, because during secularization, when churches kicked out all paintings of Grunewald and Dürer and so on, they collected it. It was the first time that anyone was interested in northern collections. Mostly people would collect Renaissance art, because that's what counted. Renaissance art was good art.
Italian.
Or Italian art was good art, on the whole, yeah. And so they looked at Gothic art and thought, this is something new, we will start collecting it. And first they showed it in Heidelberg. Many people came to see it, it's quite interesting. The building still exists in Heidelberg where they showed it. And then they approached the King of Württemberg. And the collection was up for 13 years in Stuttgart. And then, of course, the bankers wanted to sell it. So they approached the King of Württemberg, and it was after a year, a very cold winter, when potatoes were frozen and people had no food. And the prince, the son of the king, spent a lot of money on a palace called Rosenstein Schloss in Rosenstein Park in the middle of Stuttgart. And his advisors said to the king, "Who needs art? We need potatoes." And this is commonly known in Stuttgart. If you say that, people say, "Yeah, right. Now we have bitter times. Who wants to spend money for the arts?" And the museum, the Staatsgalerie in Stuttgart, approached us and left actually a message on our answering machine and said, "Well, could you think about an installation or some kind of interaction that would deal with the structure of encouraging people to use the old entrance and not the new entrance?" Because James Sterling had built a new postmodern building, and that's so attractive that everybody went there. Now this has changed a little bit because, and they said, "We have money. We can give you money right away."
And
This
we have
was
a party for sponsors and we want them to see it.
Yes, and it should be finished when we host this party for our sponsors. Okay, so that's like a typical, I would say, traditional deal of artists with museums or donors or collectors. You have to make it in a short time. So we went there, we looked around, and then we thought, okay, we're going to do something on the outside. And here you see that it's like, well, it's really a cultural discourse already in the title. The first one is in classic German. The second one is in Swabian. Wir brauchen Kunst, wir brauchen Grumbiere, was the original thing they said, right? And then the third one is the classic art language French. Nous voulons des pommes de terre et pas des tableaux. There was a long discourse with art historians in France, or should we say tableau or l'art and so on. So they said, no, art is tableau is art, nothing else. So okay, we said good, tableau. And then of course the international language in the arts is English.
Make it snappy.
Make it snappy. So we said, who needs art? We need potatoes. And so you see the whole thing. It's an environment outside, and we made 2 potato beds, an LED, yeah. So you see the statue of the king riding on a horse, you'll see in a minute, in front of the museum. You see 2 potato beds where we planted and harvested potatoes for 11 years, and a red carpet that brings people into the museum like an invitation, like a casino, and then 3 small LED walls that we attached onto the ceiling. That's another kind of research. We found out that actually there fell a bomb into this part of the museum, and the ceiling was an after-the-war construction. Otherwise, it would be under protection, and we couldn't attach anything to it. But so we were allowed. So you see, there is a school across the street, and on the left, the theater and dramatic theater, and there are a lot of cars lining up. So we thought, we're going to talk to people. Those 2 minutes they stand there, they're going to learn something, and it will make it more interesting for them because they couldn't see the potatoes. That was already for insiders. So, and we framed those potato beds with golden frames like pictures, right? And so here you see a classic thing, a king on a horse. It's the donor. He loved his museum. He spent all his money on art. And that's commonly known. And so it's a classicist building. It has this small like staircase that brings you up to the Parnasse, up to the higher, on a red carpet. And when we installed it, there were all these elderly people who go to the museum on a daily basis in Stuttgart. It's amazing. We just love that. And they said, "Oh, is the chancellor coming? Are you expecting someone important?" And we said, "You are important. We expect you to come in, and this is for you." And they said, "Oh, no, we don't want to make it dirty." And they tiptoed around it, which is just a crazy phenomenon what people do when they get like approached. And then you see these LED walls. It looks like, you know, those car salespeople that announce the BMW, whatever they do. What we did here was we announced artists and artworks. The Melancholie of course, Dürer. Huge woodcut, you know, this size, one of their most famous works. And they have Kandinsky's, and it's a marvelous collection. They have the Bothers of Picasso and so on and so on. I wasn't allowed to show it because Frida said there are too many pictures then. But you see what happens. It's also another classic in art history, a harvest. You think of Van Gogh and Millet and all other painters, and so, well, we took this picture, but what happens then with the potatoes? We said they should go to the zoo, because the king's son inaugurated the zoo. And so it's like Wilhelma, yeah, called Wilhelma in Stuttgart, a beautiful old zoo. And so it's like a whole circle. It's a digestion, of course. The art is also food for the soul, and potatoes are also food. And so one year the director came to us and said, "Can I have some potatoes for Christmas?" So he brought some home. It wasn't something we would do, because these potatoes grew on a soil where, a lot of cars came, a lot of traffic, so it's a bit polluted, but I don't know if it did something to him, but, so that's... He retired soon after, yeah, that's true, he did. So as a follow-up of this thing is an art in progress. We created an encyclopedic work about artists, because artists are a root, and something grows out of them. So we created potato portraits and like a gender discourse. So here you see women, of course there are not that many women as men, here you see men. So it's like a cross-bordering discourse on culture and the necessity of art and what art is, and we installed it in many ways over the years, which I'm not going to show to you. Of course, the person that is particularly dear to us got 2 potatoes, right? Marcel Duchamp. Yeah, and so this is something really, this was a piece of work that we're still connected with somehow, and with the archive there and so on. Of course, it created an archive and things came together and whatever. And so when we were approached to do a show for the museum in St. Louis, we thought, okay, we have to do this kind of investigational thing. We can't just bring, import things, hang them on a wall, and just let it be. That's nothing we would do. And as we had the Freund Fellowship for a whole year in St. Louis, I mean, we didn't stay there for a whole year, I should say. Each time we spent a month there. We had enough time to do research at the museum. The curators couldn't have been nicer. This is really something I would say an American quality, truly an American quality. The open-mindedness towards 2 contemporary artists who came with just some crazy questions. What's special in your collection? What's German? What can you do? You should know that St. Louis was a #1 city at a certain time when Mark Twain was there and learned to work on ships or work the boats on the Mississippi, and he would do that on a regular basis, going from St. Louis to no. He went from St. Louis to New Orleans and back, and Hannibal, his birthplace, is not far away from there. And it was an incredible city, and then of course the railway came, and Chicago hooked onto the railway and became this important city. Many of you may know that, but we have some German people here who may not know that. We thought that St. Louis was quite a nice city, and what we also learned was that in the 1840s, many German Jews came to St. Louis and created their own kind of culture there as well. And
German newspapers, 1/3 of the population spoke German in the 1850s.
And they spoke German until 1917, when America, entered the war against Germany. And this is part of the story, where is the Reichstag? Because there is this incredible story about the emperor, Wilhelm II, who was so proud. Well, he wasn't actually proud of the Reichstag. Mike will tell us more later. But it was like a hate-love, okay? And so he sent a model of the Reichstag to the World Columbian Exhibition in Chicago, end of 19th century. And then they didn't know what to do with it after a while. It was huge. It was like this space and higher, and they didn't know, made of plaster, you couldn't move it. It was in the Field Museum in Chicago, and the Field Museum wanted to kind of shift its mission, and so they said it has to go. Where should it go? And they found out, aha, there are some Germans down there in St. Louis, maybe they want it, and yes, they did. And at the same time, St. Louis was about to found this incredible museum. We were invited to do a show there. And so this was all very interesting, but this was not the beginning of our research. Actually, it came during the second stay, and just before going there, we met Mike Cullen, and we said, oh, we're going to St. Louis, and Mike said, haha, funny, go and see if you find the model of the Reichstag. We said, what model? And then Mike started explaining the whole story and how it looks, and then we went into the research, found photos, and found all kind of listings inside the collections in St. Louis. The city itself is really interesting because, you know, this arch by Saarinen from the 60s, it's a masterpiece. It's a beautiful, beautiful sculpture, and you can even go up by elevator and look over the prairie. It's the gate to the west. And so it shines in all kind of colors because it's made of a beautifully polished metal, and it's just glorious. The other thing, not even New Yorkers know, and I'm sure most of you won't know, is the Mississippian culture in St. Louis. There was a culture at one time, you can go on Wikipedia, of course, they know everything about it, but we didn't. And so somebody told us and said, you know, there are those mounds. And actually St. Louis is also called the city of mounds. And outside the city there are some existing mounds. Inside the city they were removed, they were flattened. But here they put some stairs up so people can climb up and look over the landscape. And also what they see here is, you know, some mounds are not equipped with ladders, so they don't want people to jump on it and so on, simply to keep it up. But it's a huge area on the Mississippi. I would really encourage you to go there. And one of the mounds was left, and that's the mound inside Forest Park, the second largest public park in the US, which is beautiful. And it's in the middle of St. Louis. And on the top of this mound is the St. Louis Art Museum. And the St. Louis Art Museum was inaugurated during the World Exhibition in 1904 and has this beautiful, how should I say, is kind of attached formally to the Caracalla terms in Rome. So they wanted to make it important. They wanted to make it glorious, high, extended. And what happened this year, just before we had our show, was that David Chipperfield's annex was opened. So they got a very remarkable new building attached to the old one, but kind of, Chipperfield said, this is the famous building. My building is not famous. It just helps them to get more space. So he made it dark. You see only the light on the side. It's like a pavilion, quite huge, and it's basically for the modern and contemporary German collections, of course also American, but they have so much German art, which you will see in a minute. And so when coming closer, you see also a king on a horse. And that's St. Louis from France, because the French settlers were the first ones who came to the city and gave it a name. And so there you have this German, French-German mix of cultures in the midst of America, quite remarkable. And so St. Louis is riding on this horse. It was done at the same time when the museum was open, and behind it you see the museum, and then you come in, very beautifully lit, very prestigious. And that's how it used to look like. They had sculptures of all kinds, right? Replicas of German art, replicas of antique art, French art, all kind of art. And this is how people learned about art history. That's how it used to be in the 19th century. Of course, after a while, it was removed. So when we came, this was really cleaned out. And the staircase that leads up is quite new and is connected to the new building by David Chipperfield. And in the side, in the side spaces, you see all sorts of installations. It's an encyclopedic museum. So you have Indian art, Native American art, whatever, all kind of art. And you have also what we consider Western art of all kind. And so we started our approach with Joseph Beuys. And Joseph Beuys came to America and did a very famous performance, interactive performance, where a video exists. René Bloch, who is still in this city in Berlin, had a gallery in New York, and he invited him to come and do something And so boys said, I don't want to meet any people. I just want to meet a threatened species, which is the coyote. Well, everybody in the museum said, there are so many coyotes around, they're not at all threatened. We may be threatened, but not the coyotes. However, this is the thing, and he called this piece, I like America and America likes me. And out of that, we made a piece called We Like America.
74, Vietnam War, and for sure, he said, they shoot every coyote they see, and that's why I want to meet the coyote.
Why I want to meet a coyote. Well, they got the coyote somewhere from where, New Haven or some New Jersey somewhere from. You know, there was this poor little coyote stored with some other dogs. And I don't put it down. I just mean it was kind of a civilized coyote living basically in a city. It wasn't a wild creature. So boys, as usual, had all this myth. What we made out of it was this huge piece of canvas, and we attached the letters with other fabrics on it. So we used the quilt system, the tradition of quilts, and put the letters on this long thing. And for the first time in the history of this museum, the director allowed that something is hung inside this arch and inside this frame picture, which we really thought was great. And so it has many meanings. In Europe, everybody says, oh, the Americans like the US. And in America, everybody says, oh, we like you and you like us. I mean, there is kind of this vice versa thing. So there are these different approaches how people react to it. It's really funny. And so you could please explain how we spread out our work all over the museum. That's what we're allowed to do. That's what we are encouraged to do.
Renata mentioned the new wing already here at the Chipperfield, and you'll see our installations here. Whenever you see red, we did something. There's a video, and there's another space up here on the third floor, and here you see the thing you just saw now. We Like America. And here's another space. Okay.
And that's the major exhibition space, 338,
Yes.
right?
Okay.
So that's normally for current exhibitions, which is inside the American collections, and we love that.
If you go home for Christmas and you come across St. Louis, you can see it. It's up till January 5th.
So this is our long, ongoing approach of America. America in different ways. America kind of taken out of its frame. That was one of the first maps. All made of canvases and things. American time zones, American neighbors, then the working class, the Detroit map up there, because it's made of denim, very special denim. And this one we called it the Hop Sing map. Do you know who Hop Sing was? Hop Sing was the chef in Bonanza. It was the Chinese chef, and so we used this to kind of working class material and the Chinese French material and connect the two, which was kind of seen in a critical way, like, does China take over America? And we said, yeah, we can discuss this kind of financial. You see, whatever you do, it's never just aesthetics. It's always also somehow cultural politics and so on. So that was this series of maps. And then some of the works I wanted to show to you, Jörg Immendorf, who was a scholar at Joseph Beuys when he taught at the Academy in Düsseldorf, and he painted Beusland and how it is to be Beusland in many ways. And then René Bloch loaned them a series of works connected to the coyote piece. So there is a coyote video, and with that we created a picture, and actually then a whole series, and it's called I Want to Be a Dog in America. Because it's just the opposite. We thought, Frida and I keep saying this whenever we come to the US, nobody on this planet has a better life than dogs in America, because everybody loves and pampers them and hugs them and kisses them and buys huge cushions for them and gives them the best food, and they're just the dolls of everybody. And so we made this installation, and truly everybody, they had crowds of people standing in front of this video for the first time. That's what we wanted. We wanted to show the ambivalence between these two artworks. And of course, then some people approached us and said, would you make a portrait of my dog? So we are now, you know, we are now, well, how should I say? But this is like tough business here. So you see, this is Brigitte Werneberg's little dog, little terrier. which we used for several art interactions. And this is another cute little dog belongs to someone else. Yeah, so this is like the series of dogs, but it's just in an answer to the coyote piece. And then you know that Joseph Beuys made a lot of costumes made out of felt. It has something to do with energy and heat and warmth and his experiences during World War II. And then we created something that, of course, nobody in St. Louis knew. We brought them the news about Winnetou and Old Shatterhand. We made these two parts of the costume. Actually, Frida made them.
Asylum-like, for sure.
Yeah, asylum-like, sort of. You know, so one is Winnetou and one is Old Shatterhand, because it was a boys' friendship, right? And it's this whole discourse on gay, lesbian things and so on. So it connects plenty of things together, and we installed it in a space which shows out onto the landscape where actually the Native Americans once were in Forest Park, and next to a Leupert's. And we also included a small sculpture with it. And so closer by, you see what we question this kind of East German, West German tradition about Winnetou and Karl-May-Festspiele, and me and Frida and me being dressed. Frida was always dressed for carnival as a cowboy, and I was dressed as a Apache squaw, naturally, the sister of Winnetou, right? And so we weren't
That's
about...
the European idea of the noble Indian.
But that's what we have, that's what we learned. This is how we see Native Americans. Of course, the curators of the Native American collections were in shock. They said, don't ever say the word squaw. And we said, why not? We call them, and then I went on the research pages in German museums, and they were speaking about squaws, and I showed them. And so it was a wonderful, long discussions, evening after evening with this. Why we put it also next to a Leupert's sculpture is, Leupert's was one of our professors at the Academy of Arts in Karlsruhe, and Leupert's was the super macho type of guy, and for carnival, his students had to schlep him on a big pedestal and carry him into the main hall.
The students were dressed like Native Americans.
Native Americans, and he was like the Ober-Indianer, right? And so this was our memory of it, and so we explained that to them. We are now working on a book. There are so many stories involved with all these things, vice versa, that we did. The material, of course, the German, the German map. We love mappings, and we didn't show really, not so much today, only the Munich thing, I think, but what we did here, we made a map out of felt, of course. So there is another connection to Joseph Beuys through material. And the little statues were East German productions, so it's quite a nice thing. When you enter the museum, then you find this quote. When we came there in 2002, the first time, we said, what's that? They say weapons are prohibited. I mean, nobody here would have the idea to, bring a weapon into a museum. Actually, no, but maybe a phone, but not a weapon. So this is interesting, and we spoke with the curator of the Native American collections, that's her, and because she looks at the collection in another way, and she wants to bring in more a female approach to the objects in the collection, which we found interesting. So you don't see any weapons in there, but you see...
No knife, no arrow.
Nothing,
no
but you see like the holders or the objects that come with it.
With the beads on it.
And we found that incredibly interesting. Oh, and I should also say the
And she
beads.
said, well, we were curious, and she said, oh, we don't like it, that's Beuys stuff.
Yeah, Beuys stuff, which was again with, Beuys stuff. Very interesting. And so what you saw on the two costumes, Winnetou and Old Shatterhand, those were beads from Bohemia. And actually, the Native Americans first used glass pearls from Venice and then from Bohemia. So, story after story. When you spend a while there, it's interesting. One of the most fabulous paintings there is this painting by Polke called Why Can't I Stop Smoking? And of course, smoking is something you would always connect to Native Americans, right? The Friedenspfeife. As children, we all had our own pipe.
Remake.
Huh?
A
A remake, yes, but we would just, when your parents wouldn't allow you to smoke, you would say, well, but I'm an Apache and I want to smoke my pipe. So we were tracking this down, looking at immigrants, something we have quite a range of work, and we created this series of work, and that's called Smoking Immigrants. We found out that basically every photo taken of German or European immigrants was smoking. There was always this pose with a cigarette somewhere or another. And so we looked at spaces where these immigrants were. And that's also something we love to do, to connect the geographies and bring in people. And so the first one, Marlene Dietrich smoked here on the Upper East Side, Vicky Baum, Villa Aurora, Billy Wilder in Waxman's house, which belongs now to friends of ours, Hedy Lamar in Florida, Walter Gropius in New York in front of a Mies van der Rohe building. He must have been standing there and smoking. Just can't imagine he wouldn't have done it. A cigarette, of course. Max Beckmann, we'll come to Max Beckmann a little bit later. Hannah Arendt, of course she smoked on Madison Avenue, you bet. She smoked everywhere, she didn't do anything else, right? And then Albert Einstein, and that's one of our connections to the US is Princeton. That's the station of the Dinky. So, of course, Albert Einstein was there and smoked, I'm sure. And the particular piece I want to point out is Max Beckmann. Max Beckmann spent one and a half years in St. Louis. He was invited by, what was his name? Buster D. May, and who was a huge collector. And so today, the St. Louis Art Museum has the largest Beckmann collection in the world. Hundreds and hundreds of drawings and so many marvelous paintings. And we connect him to Ted Drewes. That's an insider, absolute insider information. Ted Drewes is a great ice cream parlor that exists since 1905 or something.
Frozen custard.
And he loved sweets, you could tell. I mean, he got also a heart attack smoking and eating sweets in bed. So this is like one of the main halls with the most incredible artworks. One could do just a lecture on the work that is there. And I should also say, admission is free in St. Louis. They made a forever contract with Washington, D.C.
Free to all.
Free to all. And so everybody goes there. We met a cab driver and he said he has 6 children. He said, I go there with my kids all the time. Really great. It's really great. It's so many school classes, lively, you know, not like 10 euros here. I mean, it's just too much. So this is how we installed it in our main exhibition space. And so it's hanging on the wall. It's very light material. It's
So the AC lifts it from the wall.
So it lifts from the
Really
wall.
funny.
And this is what they want for their collection. So it's gonna stay there. And in the back you see a series which is about an East German spy who ran over to the West, became a CIA man, was then endangered somehow, and then the CIA said to him, well, or the FBI or whoever, said to him, you can choose where you want to live in the US. They wanted him to hide somewhere and
There's a new identity.
to have a new identity, yeah. And so this is the idea of identity here. It's something I didn't even mention. But, and then he looked and he said, I never saw the Mississippi. I want to go to St. Louis. And so he went to St. Louis. He became a student at Washington University, an economy student. And later he went to Wall Street. He became a broker and a trader. And then he went bankrupt. He worked in Frankfurt for what?
Lehman Brothers.
Lehman Brothers. He went bankrupt and now he's living in Budapest. So name it. This is like, you know, a global history of a man. And so we question this figure through the hiding figure, the person that hides behind something, and which has something to do with this kind of wailing and unwailing of memories and memorials and memory sites. And we also connected to the Max Frisch book Stiller. And the book, as you know, starts with the sentence, Ich bin nicht Stiller. And so, and that's the same thing that happened here. The guy was called Stiller, and later he was called Peter, and Peter Fischer. And so, which name does he use now? I mean, the Spiegel did a huge series about him. Arte just did a documentary and so on. He's famous. And people were in the audience when we gave a talk at the museum. There were people who approached us and said, he was such a nice man and so smart. He was the best organizer of parties and was a really admired man. So with that, we did a whole series with this kind of hiding pictures, also because while being there, before the new installations were inaugurated, we photographed all the pictures that were protected from dust and so on behind these. So we found it rather
So
interesting.
that's Düsseldorf School Thomas Roof,
Of
and they
course.
have put a blanket on top
Over
of it.
on top of it.
And
It
for sure-
becomes just another object, the whole thing.
So it's like Veronica.
Yeah, so it's like, and so on, right? It goes on and on. And another, this is something Frida's gonna tell you about the Madonna, which we found out while introducing Judy Mann.
Renata mentioned already that we approached all the curators in the museum, and this wonderful lady who is in charge of European art till 1800, we told her the story about this performance of Joseph Beuys, that he arrived at the airport, JFK, and was put into an ambulance, covered in felt, brought to the gallery that he wouldn't see anything, and then they took the felt away in the gallery and he saw the coyote. So, and she said, oh, that's an interesting story. We had a guy, a lender, coming here with a hearse, ein Leichenwagen, and he had wrapped his Madonna in felt to make it a safe ride, and he brought it from 50 miles east from Illinois to the museum, and he wanted that Madonna to give to the museum as a loan. And we said, oh, that's really interesting. Where is the Madonna? And so we went to the restoration department, took that picture, and then we got the story. The story is this Madonna came from Germany. And it came from a Jewish household in Wiesbaden. And that couple was deported, killed in concentration camp. But the son, a doctor, he couldn't finish his studies in Nazi Germany and went to America and came back in '45 as an American captain in the medical service, went straight to Wiesbaden, found out his parents had been killed, and the next question was, where is the art? And he found out that Madonna had been sold to the Städel in Frankfurt. So he got it back instantly because Wiesbaden was one of the collection points for looted art. And 2 or 3 years later, they shipped that Madonna with other artworks back to his hometown, Salem, Illinois. And a year later, he gave it to the museum. So that's the story of the Madonna.
That's the story, and Judy Mann was so generous to us. I mean, being a curator of old art, she said you can do whatever you want with the exhibition space. You see here the scene with René Bloch and Joseph Beuys covered and put into an ambulance. And so we created an artwork that is like a double altar piece and tells the whole story, which you can't read now.
So we used the outline of a 48 Packard hearse and put the Madonna inside and tell the whole story around it, like a mandala. That's the normal image, how you place a Madonna in this race around it. And here is a letter that he sent to the collection point. And here is the travel of the Madonna to Frankfurt, the Städel, going back to Wiesbaden, Illinois, and here, St. Louis.
And to St. Louis, and of course now it belongs to the museum.
They bought it in '61.
Yeah, rightly so. And so we were allowed to move a Rogia van der Weyden and put our picture there next to the Madonna. So now the Madonna of the Rogia van der Weyden was on the left side initially, and so we put it there, and so people learned about the whole history of the sculpture, which doesn't exist normally. And so the son, again, of Mr. Katzenstein, Dr. Katzenstein, approached us and said, oh, it should stay there forever, and so on and so on. So we'll see how they, could, or if they could install it. Of course, it would be great if it would stay there. And now, this is the last picture and the last question. Where is the Reichstag? When you enter the exhibition space, you see a little raft. And this is what we claim, that's how the artwork came there. Somehow the Mississippi is such a strong picture inside St. Louis. And also Mike claimed, he said it might have come on the Mississippi or being shipped from Chicago. It probably came on the railway, because it would be more direct, but you never know, right? Because at that time they did a lot of combination transport systems.
It came by railway, but how they crossed the Mississippi by raft or bridge, I don't know. But it was in the rail depot outside of outside of St. Louis before it got to the museum.
Oh, right.
That's for sure.
Okay.
But how it crossed the Mississippi, it didn't come down the Mississippi, but it came by way of river, it crossed the Mississippi.
From Illinois to
to
Missouri, yeah. Because the Mississippi is actually, St. Louis is exactly the border, the two states. And this is something then what we found in the archives of the museum. And also.
That's all that's left of a huge plaster model.
We looked everywhere.
The last line
And
says,
the archivists looked everywhere.
returned to Washington University in 1917 because the museum said we need that space. What do we want with this huge model, and let's give it back to
What
the
was the
university.
size, Frieder, say it again? It was huge. Was it a 9 by 6 or 10 by 6 or
Close
meter?
to that, yes.
You know, and also like 3.50 meters high and plaster. And you couldn't even walk inside. It had no use. It was just standing there, utterly heavy. And the German Empire said, we don't want it back. It's too expensive to ship it back. And we give it to you as a present, okay? So they were stuck with it. And of course then when the war came up, we met a donor to the museum, a huge supporter, Mark Weil, an art historian himself, and he said that in 1917 his grandfather stopped speaking German. That was the year. It was like over. And I think this was like the beginning of the separation between Germany and America. First World War and then Second World War and so on. It's just very interesting and I think would be worth a special thing, investigation how it happened. But we couldn't
So nobody
find it.
knows where it is, and we say maybe it was traveling down the Mississippi.
Well, we say it's somewhere, but we also said, well, look inside your closets, basically, but look inside your cellars or schools or something. Maybe there is a remnants left somewhere, you know. And so what we created was actually a history of the Reichstag, everything that came together with the Reichstag. This is the original picture of the model, which is on the internet. And there are a bunch of other photos on the internet. And then we created this thing together with the label, the museum label. Now, that caused a huge shock for the museum. They said, you are showing us or presenting us as a museum that is losing artworks. We said, for heaven's sake, this was in 1917, and it's 1917, it wasn't an artwork, and then I found a way to explain it another way. I said, this was an architectural model, that's not an artwork, right? And it was just too big, and the museum actually never wanted it, and the new building didn't exist when they got it, didn't exist yet, so they would have had to kind of bring it inside the museum, which was basically impossible to, you know, bring it up the stairs or whatever. It's just so complicated. So they said, oh, okay. And there is another museum, the Museum of the University, the Kemper Museum, and they are actually also part of this whole story because the model got lost on the way from the St. Louis Art Museum to the University Museum, now called Kemper Museum. And it has also a great collection, a lot of Beckmans and contemporary art and so on. And so there is this thing, so we'll see where this piece will go after a while. Yeah, and what we wanted also to achieve was writing on it and attaching it onto the canvas, the print of the Reichstag, and putting it on this canvas. We wanted to achieve this writing that it actually exists inside the Reichstag by Russian soldiers, and also connected to another great polka piece, which is the Schimpftuch. Yeah, and the Schimpftuch. So we looked at things, and this was also actually not known inside the museum, this word, which he then puts around and makes a performance out of it. We didn't do that, I have to say. So it got a huge audience.
We would have done it if they wouldn't have taken it.
Yeah, right. It's exactly. But there was a lot of press, and we were also on the radio. So from day one, we got a huge audience that wanted to see the missing. Of course, everybody was interested in seeing a missing thing in the museum. And so you see parts of the installations that are very classy. What we also connected it with through the video, for this extra video space, is of course to St. Louis, close by Basel in France. And the video is called Liquid Traces. And liquid traces connects two issues, that similarity between St. Louis, France and St. Louis, America, which is the Mississippi and the Rhine, two major rivers, mythical rivers, one should say, and also the ability to drink. St. Louis is the capital of beer. And Anheuser-Busch, Budweiser and all that, they have a beer academy there, a huge one. It's not just, it's really a huge one. So it's a place for beer, and of course St. Louis, France, being in Alsace, is a place for Crémant and white wine and Pinot Blanc and Noir and so on. So we connected these two things and went on a research odyssey in a French and in an American supermarket. And so that's that, right?
That's that.
So that's that. That's
We're
it.
finished. Thank you.